Anne Truitt's one of my favorite artists. She's from the post-war period, right after World War II, and somewhat after the Korean War as well. Like a lot of post-war artists, she really was tied up in her times. Anne Truitt's work is considered to be of the minimalist vein and also post-painterly abstraction. This is from the Clement Greenberg collection. Greenberg was really the person who gave her kind of the context of post-painterly abstraction. And Greenberg didn't really champion that many sculptors. He was more into painting. What we see here, this is a very early piece, this is 1963. Anne Truitt made her first sort of successful mature work in 1961, and it was called First. So it's very early on in her career. And what's very interesting about this piece is that, and Anne's work in particular, is that it literally is both painting and sculpture. The collision, it's trying to, not only is it sort of trying to bridge the gap, it's sort of already synthesized the two. You'll see in this work is she always deals in threes. You have a lighter blue, darker blue, and then a white. She wanted she's different than the other minimalist artists who were sort of draining the world of a lot of metaphor. And instead of giving this metaphor, she just imbued it with kind of an emotional presence. She actively translated her daily emotional life into her work in a very direct way that she shared, whereas you don't get so much from the male artists of that same time. And what's interesting about Truitt is that it's almost like she puts this more human side into minimalism that people don't think about, because minimalism is something just made up by art historians for convenience sake. And really what it was is a reduction in the amount of metaphor. But because she was a woman, she wasn't taken as seriously. It's almost like there's a different history of art of important female artists, or important artists who happen to be female, who weren't given as much attention during the time because they were women. The difference is that Anne Truitt's work is emotional, and this color, and it drove Donald Judd a little bit cranky. He was a cranky man. He was a very good critic, and he wrote a review of her first show in 1963, and you got to remember that Anne is kind of a competitor of his, because he's about to have his first solo show as well at that time. He wrote, "Anne Truitt's work seems serious, though it isn't." And then he went on to kind of describe it as they're a bunch of tombstones. Well, she actually made a work that looked very much like a tombstone in design. And she was very aware of death. She was very curious about the hearings of people's tragedies and what they'd gone through. She was focused on it. There's another history of art, and it's not whether you're male or female, but it might have a lot to do with who got left on the wayside of the discussion. Anne Truitt is as much an alternate facet of what people talk about for minimalism, and maybe mislabel minimalism, that there's an emotional side to minimalism that people aren't necessarily aware of. They always talk of it as being a cold style, and I would modify that word and say it's a stoic style. And the next piece that we have here is Dan Flavin's To Donna. It's Untitled To Donna 2, and it's from 1971. Dan Flavin did a series of works to somebody named Donna, 9 that I've found so far from the complete list of his works. 9 works from 1971 to 1973. Dan Flavin, like Anne Truitt, would often allude to a person or dedicate a piece to somebody. oftentimes not telling you exactly why. A lot of times they were movie stars or somebody they looked up to or a scientist. Part of why both Judd and Flavin as a group were radicals, they were looking for something that wasn't made from art materials. And Flavin, very early on at the Green Gallery, his breakthrough came in that he would actually start affixing different light bulbs to what were essentially colored panels. And he was trying to disassociate himself from traditional art materials. One of his greatest collectors was Count Giuseppe Panza, who died just a couple weeks ago. And Panza had a really interesting observation about Dan Flavin's work, in that light is a very strange material to work with, that it's not solid and doesn't take on a reality until it hits a surface, that it needs something else around it in order to make it apparent. You're seeing the photons when they hit the wall behind it. He's using literally simple mechanical, industrially available things that you could pick up at a hardware store, and colored lights, frankly, that you could also get, special order for these things, and just simply arranging them. And he wanted it to be direct. He didn't want it to have some sort of rich metaphysical meaning or some intense emotional response. It literally was supposed to be just what you see in front of you. And this is kind of getting back to this sort of draining something of metaphor. It's literally about the experience. And what I very much appreciate is the way it co-opts the rest of the room around it. Suddenly, installation art has come into its own. His friend Donald Judd wrote an essay called Specific Objects, and it talked about something that it's neither on the wall or on the floor. And by making it diagonal, he's actually even conflating, which wall you're organizing yourself. And he talked about obliterating walls with his work. Color as a way to obliterate the wall. And it's somewhat of an institutional critique, actually. Sort of the switch to installation art is all about the experience, and the way he's co-opted the room, you probably wouldn't have even noticed this corner had this thing not illuminated it and highlighted it and sort of brought about its texture and the relationship to the height of the ceiling and everything else. It's a very savvy move, but it's also very open. And what I like about Flavin is he's not such a control freak in that he's very much more like Anne Truitt than he probably wanted to be in that respect. Maybe not emotional, but he certainly had an open-ended relationship to color, and he invited people to sort of have associations. And you'll notice these are the three primary colors. This is originally red, so red, yellow, blue. It's very simple, from which all other colors transpire. It's definitely, there's a theatrical element that he's creating, and he's trying to destroy this corner of the room with light, but at the same time, he's reinforcing it.